What a crazy chapter. Today, my brothers, we will not only cover the absolute insane chapter 205 with Star and Oil, but also try and unravel the terms and barrier usage that this chapter has shown, because I'm certain that this recent chapter has left many of us with a mixture of hype as well as confusion, because barrier techniques in general haven't been heavily explored often. In fact, we are right now about to witness the most complicated and high-level barrier battle likely in the history of Jujutsu Kaisen. I don't often say this, but I really strongly recommend rereading this chapter and paying close attention to its contents, as well as my own takes and what I say myself, because I'd like to deepen my own understanding of this series as well, and you brothers' comments and your own input is appreciated in doing that. And I'm sure many fans will just be confused anyway, and that's just how Gege rolls sometimes, just explaining impossible concepts like it's normal. The chapter notes literally define things with no definition, like imaginary mass, the Sanyuta, and other supplementary info that is very strange. If I'm being honest, it makes the chapter a whole lot more complicated than it initially was. Yet it's also some of the most entertaining and fascinating things to think about. The TCP fan scans came in clutch because this context is actually very helpful with trying to interpret what Gege might be thinking with different elements, because Gege implements lore, story, realism, and knowledge into a very brilliant manga. And we can get a lot from it, especially if we at least try to follow Gege's wild mind and all this. But whether we understand it or not, it's still peak. This chapter was very fun, so let's do our best to break it down. Alright, starting off this amazing chapter, we have our girl Yuki Tsukumo debuting in this fight, finally. And a couple of things that I learned was that Yuki is so much more amazing than I initially thought, and Kenjaku was actually more ill prepared than I'd imagined. Really, it's more like we see more personality from Kenjaku. I can't say he's less imposing than I'd imagine, but I think it's more like he's more limited than I'd imagine. Like, we actually see Kenjaku getting hurt for the first time, and he certainly got shook up a couple times during this battle, and that was actually kind of cool to see a little bit of imperfection with him. But in the first page of this chapter, we get to see Chozo tagging out and Yuki tagging in. It's awesome to see Yuki emerging into battle. She's wearing her uniform and commending Chozo. I love this moment. And it looks like Chozo leaves the battle via dropping into Tengens' barrier, which I will explain later. But Yuki gets absolutely pumped up and ready to fight Kenjaku. Because Kenjaku is basically in control of Jujutsu Tech, he knows all the information from the higher up administration. But for some reason, he has no info on Yuki Tsukumo or what her technique even is, even though she is a designated special grade. So Kenjaku keeps his cool and actually tries to flex a little by telling Yuki to stay back, and he releases a special grade curse. We've actually seen this curse before, and it's modeled directly after Ganesha, a foreign god in Hinduism. Yuki remarks that this curse was imported, which is very interesting because Kenjaku at one point in time has seized a curse from an Asiatic god, likely from India. However, Ganesha is a curse in JJK that is the remover of obstacles. It can entangle with concepts on a given target. This special grade seems utterly divine to be able to affect concepts itself. Kenjaku is very self-assured, and likely if he faced anyone else, he'd actually have a reason to be so smug, since Kenjaku is nigh on untouchable. However, compared to Yuki, even one of Kenjaku's greatest curses is light work. She calls upon her curse named Garuda, condenses the spirit into a sphere, and kicks it like a soccer ball, ferociously slamming it into Ganesha and promptly killing the curse instantly. What?
Hey, yo, what the fuck?
Even Kenjaku's like, hold up now, wait a minute. Yuki's actually nice with it. She destroys this curse and blitzes towards Kenjaku, taunting that Kenjaku was actually scared to get in close since he doesn't have a clue what her technique is, so she makes it easy for him. Yuki reveals her curse technique is mass. and she proceeds to punch the living shit out of Kenjaku. This likely is one of the hardest punches we have seen so far, as it caught Kenjaku by surprise and it exposed him pretty badly. Bro, Yuki punched him so hard that when he blocked it, it went through both of his arms and mutilated his face. This dude got knocked into 5 different panels and was hit hard enough that he was knocked through this sanctum barrier called the Sanyuta. And this is where things go from crazy to conceptually unreal. Yuki hits so damn hard with her mass that it doesn't even make sense. The mass she creates is so impossibly large that it cannot even be defined or explained. It's like an imaginary infinity. Yuki confirms that her technique is imbuing virtual mass into herself, and she calls it the Wrath of the Star. The cursed spirit that's with her, called Garuda, is used as a cursed tool via her technique and is the only other object targeted by the technique and this mass. Just one hit was enough to radically dismember Kenjaku. Even when he assumedly blocked with cursed energy reinforcement, it still messed him up pretty badly. However, Kenjaku has replenished himself and healed with the use of reverse curse technique, so he's still good to go. And now he faces the new challenge to overcome, because Yuki and her curse are just like living embodiments of conceptual mass that ignores reason. Kenjaku himself, a mastermind, a top-class elite fighter, one of the best sorcerers in a millennia, questions whether it's possible to hunt such a wild beast. It's at this point that Kenjaku and Yuki size each other up. They both are special grade combatants with powers out of this world, so they have to consider the possibility that they both have cards that they hadn't revealed yet. For Kenjaku, Yuki points out that he has more curse techniques than curse spirit manipulation and body hopping. When fighting Chozo, she saw that Kenjaku manipulated gravity and came to the conclusion that his extracted curse techniques like auto transfiguration are single use only. So taking that into consideration, Yuki thinks that Kenjaku specifically has an innate technique involving gravity, because he wouldn't waste a single use technique from Uzumaki just to counter Chozo's blood. He has to have a third permanent technique, and Yuki thinks that that is gravity, which is honestly insane that Kenjaku would not only be able to harness curse techniques through Uzumaki, but also have a means to have different curse techniques altogether. It's important to distinguish that because it's very easy to assume Kenjaku is using gravity harnessed through curse spirit manipulation with Uzumaki, but no, this is something entirely different. She even says it's unlikely Kenjaku would extract more curse techniques, because if one doesn't have an external storage system or medium like how Yuta uses Rika, the user's brain would overload from the curse technique's information. So in the worst case scenario, Yuki just assumes Kenjaku would have a fourth innate technique other than gravity. Reading all this was crazy, because if Kenjaku was to fry his brain from possessing extracted techniques like auto transfiguration, this dude still already has like 3 to 4 techniques, and that's just something that he naturally has within his wisdom and his body and what he inherited. The fanbook said that when Kenjaku switched bodies, the host curse technique should disappear when the brain hijacks. However, Kenjaku has a way of getting around it. So now Yuki has to contend with more than just curse spirit manipulation. On the other hand, Kenjaku worries that Yuki is also hiding something like a strong extension technique with high output. Usually when a sorcerer names their attack like Ratio Collapse, Straw Doll, Hairpin, Supernova, for example, those are all considered extension techniques, and they're rather tricky to deal with, having different effects than the main technique. So Kenjaku now has to manage a powerhouse like Yuki and imagine her extension technique. Like imagine her using something like, I don't know, just something crazy like Rising Star Plasma Crush, something insane with extremely high output and power. So ironically, they both have a similar mindset, and they find each other's techniques either too powerful or too hard to manage. Yuki though, she wants to stick to the plan of trying to get Kenjaku to use his domain expansion, then defeat him when Kenjaku is in a state where his curse technique burns out and is very difficult to use, even though she will be in the same state as well. So yeah, Yuki is gonna pop a domain expansion as well. However, in a non-curse technique state, she will have an advantage of using Garuda and would win that battle. So she has to chip away at Kenjaku first to weaken Kenjaku to reduce his domain's effectiveness and intensity when he deploys it. However, Kenjaku is already 5 steps ahead. He reasons that both their curse techniques are not suited for fighting each other in a practical sense, but she still hasn't initiated a domain expansion. Usually a confident sorcerer would use a domain to win. It's almost like she's confessing that she couldn't outright win in a domain battle at full and has to weaken Kenjaku first. So he calls her bluff and freaking expands a domain called the all-enveloping Garbabatu, a sick and twisted domain. But this is actually what Yuki was looking for, and she calls upon Tengen to help her. So now it comes down to what these two are planning, leaving things off on an epic cliffhanger. Now first, I want to say that this chapter was fantastic. The TCB fan scan is goated for real, for giving us 6 pages of supplementary info. 6 pages. God knows the official Viz is not doing that. The other week, according to the Viz translation and Viz canon, Gojo was literally implied to possess cursed spirit manipulation with how they worded sentences. Later, it was edited slightly and it still implies the same thing. Like right now, I know I'm kind of ranting about it, but recently the official Viz has been almost impossible to read for me with how they word things and how they portray certain moments. The fan scans just make so much more sense. It hits more. Like, come on now. Someone literally sat down and wrote an essay on metaphysical events, plus a conceptual chart involving impossible to define scenarios like semantics and pragmatics, with sources included. JJK fans must be built different. They must be, because this kind of shit blows my mind. Never in my life did I think I'd be interested in reading an article on why water is wet and red is red in a metaphysical sense. It's crazy. Seriously, I can't truly explain something that cannot be defined, not really in a simple way. So really, I'll just try to give my own takes based on the info that we were given. And honestly, this info is mostly from a theory given by a very, very talented and motivated JJK fan or editor. Whoever wrote this saw truth itself, because I have no clue how someone can give concept to something with no concept. And starting off with the actual barrier that our sorcerers are in and they're fighting at, this barrier is regarded as the Sanyuta. This is a veil within the tomb of the star that acts as like a tangible emptiness, a basic constitution of reality, a barrier that has been refined so much it is a phenomenon that becomes so empty that it can no longer be emptied out. This phenomenon is so complicated that it has no singular definition. At least not to my understanding. There's really no right way to measure the absence of reality in theory, which is likely why the TCB editor had like 15 different definitions, because it's all how Gege would interpret the absence of everything. This barrier is like reality itself, refined down to a level so basic that it's forced to exist within the JJK's world. It's like the fundamental building blocks of JJK's domain space. So this may be why we saw Kenjaku and Tengen manipulate the barrier in a way to create a tea room like we saw, and even a movie theater with full furnishings and tangible objects, to create something from nothing. This is the barrier of the great sage Tengen, so I'd expect it to be pretty wild, but to be this obscure is actually very hard to wrap my head around. But this is why Yukis Mass is so incredible, because it managed to hit so hard that it tore the concept of emptiness itself. The barrier is like an ever-expanding space, or like a repeating pattern to be never-ending, but it still has a circular definition like an invisible perimeter. Just look at how the hole is in front of the tree, like a tear in reality, yet Yuki managed to tear that space and make that hole. She has mass that breaks the concept of realism. Another technique like Gojo's that fundamentally goes against the laws of physics. It's insane how cracked she is. She literally hits you so hard that it doesn't make sense. But I think that's quite enough of all of that already for today. I don't know, Gege must be like a quantum physics instructor on the side, because the implication of barriers is very overwhelming. But to be honest, it's not something super important, but knowing that info lets you appreciate just how detailed barrier techniques are. So just imagine the info dump when we see the highest level domain battle in all of the series, potentially with Yuki, Kenjaku, and Tengen all erecting barriers and doing domains at the same time potentially. Like, what would that even look like? But this chapter we finally saw Kenjakus Domain, and this thing looks crazy, representing Womb Realm, which is literally perfect for Kenjaku. Kenjaku's name itself suggests compassion and salvation, and the aggregate of Womb Realm is like birthing / blooming wisdom to surpass human failings, to learn compassion and emerge enlightened. Of course, this teaching is corrupted in JJK's canon as like a curse, and this Womb Realm is much more of like a rotting, ugly, and horrific side of negativity. Part of this domain is being all enveloping, and that might suggest the horrific effects of Kenjaku's quest for knowledge, like an amalgamation of disaster. And the symbolism right here is pretty hardcore with how this domain is portrayed. I couldn't even tell you what this domain originates from, what technique, because with what we know about Kenjaku, he has like potentially 4 different curse techniques altogether. And this could be something from curse spirit manipulation, like a curse spirit domain, or some just unholy mixture of curse techniques and curse spirits within the depths of Kenjaku's dark wisdom. Who even knows the depth of Kenjaku's knowledge? I cannot wait to see how this domain expansion battle plays out, and how Yuki as well as Tengen pulls this off, because finally Tengen does something besides just watch and let the world spiral into chaos. Well, I guess it's too late for that, but at least they're doing something big. Tengen is the most powerful barrier user in all of Jujutsu Kaisen, so I'd assume it could match Kenjaku's insanity. But Tengen didn't sound too sure about that, and I really don't like Tengen's doubtfulness. But what's crazy is how Tengen could very well be the creator of barrier techniques within Jujutsu, and Kenjaku could still be the one to surpass him. This was a very awesome chapter, and seeing Yuki in action was insanity. She was peak. Please make sure to share your comments below. Your input is so much appreciated, especially on an insane chapter like this. And we also got to see Yuki's type of man revealed, which is a W in my book. That's a W moment right there. And next chapter, 100%, it will be just as complicated and probably even more peak. I truly thank you all for watching this video. This has been Enemy Stand User, and I'll see you awesome guys in the next one. Bye-bye.